The iron bell of Cumberland County rang 3 times that October morning in 1840, but it wasn't calling folks to church. Everyone in those Kentucky hills knew what 3 rings meant. Another girl was being claimed, another family was collecting their price. And if you listened close enough between those bells, you could hear something else, something the reverend never mentioned in his Sunday sermons, something that sounded almost like children screaming from underneath the floorboards of the old Patterson estate, where no children were supposed to be. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me tell you about Sarah Thornhill, because her story is where everything that happened in Cumberland County that autumn started to unravel, and what they found in the end, well, that's something the history books will never tell you. Something so disturbing that 3 families left Kentucky in the middle of the night and never spoke their own names again. Sarah Thornhill was 11 years old when her father told her to pack her Sunday dress. She had green eyes that changed color depending on the light, freckles scattered across her nose like thrown seed, and a habit of chewing her bottom lip when she was thinking hard about something. She'd been born in the winter of 1829, delivered during an ice storm so fierce her mother said the windows cracked from the cold, spiderwebbing outward like the world itself was breaking apart. Her father, Thomas Thornhill, owned 40 acres of rocky land that grew more stones than crops, and her mother, Rebecca, had buried 3 babies before Sarah, tiny graves marked with river rocks behind their cabin. Sarah didn't know this yet, but she was the only Thornhill child who would survive to see 12, though survival is a strange word for what was about to happen to her. The morning her father made his announcement, Sarah had been feeding their chickens, thin birds that barely laid eggs anymore. The sky was the color of a healing bruise, purple and yellow, mixing together in ways that made you feel uneasy just looking at it. Her father came out of the cabin with his hat already on, which meant he'd made up his mind about something serious. Thomas Thornhill was a lean man, bent slightly forward like he was always walking into a strong wind, with hands so calloused they felt like tree bark when he touched you. He wasn't a cruel man by the standards of 1840 Kentucky, which is to say he only hit his family when he thought they deserved it, and he never broke any bones that couldn't heal. "Sarah," he said, and his voice had that flat quality it got when he was trying not to feel anything. "Go on inside and help your mother get your things together. We're taking you to the Patterson place. Come Sunday." Sarah dropped the tin cup of chicken feed. It hit the ground with a sound like a small bell, corn scattering across the dirt. The chickens ignored it. Even they seemed to sense something wrong in the air. "The Patterson place?" Sarah's voice came out smaller than she wanted. "Why would we go there?" Her father looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. It looked almost like fear, but mixed with something else, something that made her stomach twist. "You're being married, girl, to Silas Patterson. His first wife died birthing their 4th child, and he's in need of a new one. He's offered your mother and me $60, plus a breeding sow and winter provisions. It's a good offer, a generous one." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Sarah had seen Silas Patterson exactly 3 times in her life. Once at the county fair when she was 8, where he'd bought a horse and argued with the seller about mange. Once at the general store where he'd smelled like tobacco and sweat and something sour she couldn't identify. And once at a funeral for someone whose name she couldn't remember, where he'd stared at her over the casket in a way that made her want to hide behind her mother's skirts. Silas Patterson had gray in his beard. Silas Patterson had children older than Sarah. Silas Patterson was at least 40 years old, maybe older. "Papa, I'm 11, Sarah said, and she hated how her voice shook. I don't even, I'm 11 years old." "Your grandmother was married at 10, her father said, and he said it like that explained everything, like that made it reasonable. "You'll be 12 before spring. Patterson's agreed to wait for relations until you're at least 13. That's more than generous. Most men wouldn't wait at all." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, still not quite looking at her. "This is how things are, Sarah. This is how they've always been. You'll have a roof over your head and food in your belly. That's more than we can promise you here." Sarah wanted to run. She wanted to scream. She wanted to do something, anything, but her body felt frozen, like her bones had turned to ice right there in the chicken yard. "Does Mama know?" "It was your mama's idea," her father said quietly, and that's when Sarah understood that there was no escape, no argument that would change anything, because if even her mother had agreed to this, then she was already sold, already gone, already transformed from daughter to commodity. Inside the cabin, her mother was folding Sarah's spare dress, the one with the tear in the hem that Rebecca had mended 3 times. The cabin was a single room with a sleeping loft, walls made of logs chinked with mud, a fireplace that smoked when the wind blew wrong, and one window covered with oiled paper that let in light, but not much of a view. Rebecca Thornhill was 32 years old, but looked older, worn down by childbirth and hard work and winters that seemed to get longer every year. She didn't look up when Sarah came in. "Mama," Sarah said, and her voice broke on the word. "Mama, please." Rebecca's hands paused on the dress, just for a moment. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she said softly. "You think I want this? You think any mother wants this? But you'll eat better there than you ever have here. You'll have dresses that fit. You'll have a purpose." She finally looked at Sarah, and her eyes were dry, frighteningly dry. "Girls like us don't get to choose, Sarah. We get to survive. That's all. That's the only choice we ever really get." "But I'm 11, Sarah whispered. "I'm just 11, and I was 12, Rebecca said sharply. 12, when I married your father, and I was grateful for it. Grateful to get out of a house with 7 hungry children and a father who drank more than he worked. You don't understand now, but you will. You'll understand that sometimes the only power a girl has is the power to endure." Sarah climbed up to the sleeping loft and lay down on the thin mattress, stuffed with corn husks that crackled every time she moved. Through the gaps in the floorboards, she could hear her parents talking in low voices. She caught fragments. "The money will get us through winter, better than watching her starve. Patterson's got a good house, sturdy. She'll adjust. They always do." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She stared at the roof beams, counting the knots in the wood, trying to imagine what her life would be like in the Patterson house. She'd heard stories about it. Everyone had. The Patterson estate was one of the largest properties in Cumberland County, a 2-story house with real glass windows and a separate kitchen building, and slave quarters out back where 4 families lived. Silas Patterson owned 23 slaves, grew tobacco and hemp, and was respected at the county courthouse where he sometimes served as a witness in land disputes. He was a man of standing. That's what people said. A man of standing. But Sarah had also heard other things, whispered things, that the women mentioned when they thought children weren't listening. She'd heard that his first wife, Mary, had looked haunted in the months before her death, that she'd lost 2 teeth and walked with a limp. She'd heard that his children, 3 boys aged 15, 12 and 9, plus a 6-year-old daughter, were unnaturally quiet, that they moved through the world like little ghosts, never playing, never laughing. She'd heard that servants who went to work at the Patterson place sometimes left in the middle of the night without collecting their wages. And she'd heard something else, something that made less sense, something about sounds coming from under the house, sounds that couldn't be explained. Sunday came too fast and too slow at the same time. Sarah wore her good dress, the brown one with the white collar that her mother had starched until it was stiff as paper. Her father hitched up their mule to the wagon, and the 3 of them rode in silence toward the Patterson estate. It was a 5-mile journey through woods that were starting to turn autumn colors, reds and golds that should have been beautiful, but instead looked like the trees were bleeding. The road was rutted and hard, and every jolt of the wagon felt like it was taking her father from everything she'd ever known. The Patterson house appeared through the trees like something from a different world. 2 stories of whitewashed wood, a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides, 6 glass windows reflecting the morning sun, and a chimney on each end releasing thin streams of smoke. Behind the main house stood the kitchen building, a barn larger than Sarah's entire cabin, a smokehouse, and farther back the slave quarters, a row of small buildings that looked like they'd been built from whatever lumber was left over from everything else. Silas Patterson was waiting on the porch. He stood perfectly still, hands clasped behind his back, watching them approach with an expression that Sarah couldn't read. He wore a black suit with a vest, a white shirt that looked clean enough to reflect light, and boots polished to a shine. His beard was neatly trimmed, more grey than brown, and his eyes were a pale blue that reminded Sarah of ice on a winter pond, beautiful and dangerous at the same time. "Thomas," Patterson said as Sarah's father climbed down from the wagon. "Rebecca, and this must be Sarah." He smiled, but it didn't reach those ice-blue eyes. "My, you're a pretty little thing, aren't you? Come here, child. Let me get a proper look at you." Sarah's legs didn't want to move, but her father's hand on her back pushed her forward. She walked toward Silas Patterson, feeling like she was walking toward the edge of a cliff, toward something that would change her irrevocably the moment she reached it. Patterson took her chin in his hand, tilting her face up toward the light. His fingers were cold. They smelled like tobacco and something chemical, something sharp that made her nose wrinkle. "Good teeth," he said, and he wasn't talking to Sarah. He was talking to her father. "Eyes are clear. Seems healthy enough. Skinny, but we'll fatten her up. She'll do." He released her chin and turned to Thomas. "Let's discuss the particulars inside. Sarah, you go around back to the kitchen. My daughter Ruth will show you where you'll be sleeping." Sarah's mother kissed her forehead once, quickly, like she was afraid if she did it slowly she might not be able to let go. "Be good," Rebecca whispered. "Be obedient. Don't cause trouble." Then she and Thomas followed Silas Patterson into the house, and Sarah was left standing in the yard, alone. She found her way around to the kitchen building, a structure separate from the main house to keep the heat and fire risk away from the living quarters. Inside, a large black woman was kneading bread dough, her arms dusted with flour up to her elbows. She looked at Sarah with eyes that held too much knowledge, too much weariness. "You the new bride?" the woman asked, and there was no judgment in her voice, only a deep, bottomless sadness. "I'm Sarah," she said, because she didn't want to call herself a bride, didn't want to accept that word yet. "I'm Bessie. I cook, clean, and do whatever else needs doing around here." Bessie wiped her hands on her apron. "Ruth's supposed to come get you, but that child moves at her own pace. You might as well sit down while you're waiting. You look like you're about to fall over." Sarah sat on a wooden stool near the fireplace, where a pot of something was simmering, filling the air with the smell of onions and meat. The kitchen was warm, almost too warm, and Sarah felt sweat starting to prick at her hairline. Through the open door, she could see part of the main house, and beyond that, the fields where several enslaved people were working, their movements slow and rhythmic in the morning heat. "How long have you been here?" Sarah asked quietly. "Too long," Bessie said. Then she looked at Sarah with an expression that might have been pity or might have been warning. "Listen, child, I'm going to tell you something, and you need to hear it proper. This house got rules. Master Patterson got rules. You follow them rules. You keep your head down. You don't ask questions about things that ain't your business, and you might make it through okay. You understand what I'm telling you?" "What kind of things?" Sarah asked. Bessie's face closed up like a door slamming. "The kind you don't ask about. The kind you pretend you don't hear when you hear them. The kind that'll get you worse than hurt if you go poking around where you shouldn't." She turned back to her bread dough, pounding it harder than necessary. "Ruth, get yourself in here, girl. Master's new bride is waiting." A thin child appeared in the doorway, and Sarah recognized her as Patterson's daughter, Ruth. She was 6 years old but looked younger, with tangled blonde hair, a dress that hung on her like it was 3 sizes too big, and eyes that seemed too large for her face. She stared at Sarah without smiling. "Hello," Sarah said gently. "I'm Sarah. I know who you are," Ruth said in a flat, emotionless voice. "Papa told us you were coming." Told us we had to be nice to you. Told us you were going to be our new mama, even though you're not much older than Jessie, and Jessie's 12, and that doesn't make any sense, but nothing makes sense here anyway. Ruth, Bessie said sharply. Mind yourself. Ruth ignored her. Come on, I'll show you where you're sleeping. It's in the attic room, the one where Mama used to lock herself when Papa got angry. She said it was the only place she felt safe, but then she died anyway, so I guess it didn't work. She turned and walked away, expecting Sarah to follow. Sarah glanced at Bessie, who shook her head slightly, a warning to stay silent. Then Sarah followed Ruth out of the kitchen and toward the main house. They entered through a side door into a hallway that smelled like beeswax and old wood. The floors were made of polished planks that creaked under Sarah's feet. On the walls hung paintings of people she didn't recognize, stern-faced men and women who looked like they'd never smiled in their lives. Ruth led her up a narrow staircase to the second floor, then to an even narrower staircase that led to the attic. The attic room was small and hot, with a slanted ceiling and one round window that looked out over the back field. There was a narrow bed, a trunk, and a washstand with a cracked basin. The room smelled like dust and something else, something Sarah couldn't identify. This is where you'll sleep until the wedding, Ruth said. After the wedding you'll sleep in Papa's room, in Mama's place, she said, it without emotion, like she was reciting facts about the weather. The wedding's in 2 weeks. Reverend Hayes is coming to do it here at the house. You'll wear Mama's wedding dress. Papa already had it taken out of the trunk. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, feeling dizzy. Ruth, she said carefully, what happened to your mama? Ruth's 2 large eyes fixed on her. She died birthing a baby that died too. But that's not what really killed her. What really killed her was living here, living with Papa, doing what Papa wanted. She moved closer, and Sarah could smell something sour on the child's breath. Do you hear them? Hear what? The sounds, Ruth whispered, from under the house, from down in the cellar where Papa keeps the things he doesn't want anybody to see. Mama heard them too. She started hearing them about 3 months before she died. She said they were calling to her. She said they knew her name. A chill ran down Sarah's back, despite the heat of the attic. Ruth, what's in the cellar? But before Ruth could answer, a voice called from downstairs. Ruth, come down here, now. It was Silas Patterson, and his voice had a sharp edge to it. Ruth's face went pale. I have to go, she said quickly. Don't tell Papa what I said. Don't tell him about the sounds. He gets angry when people talk about the sound. She fled down the stairs, her footsteps quick and light. Sarah sat alone in the attic room as the afternoon light slanted through the round window. She could hear voices from below, muffled by distance and floorboards. She could hear the sound of horses in the barn, someone chopping wood, a rooster crowing even though it wasn't morning. And underneath all of that, if she listened very carefully, if she pressed her ear to the floor, she thought she could hear something else, something that might have been the wind moving through crawl spaces under the house, or something that might have been breathing, or something that might have been very, very quiet crying. That night, Sarah's parents left. She watched from the attic window as their wagon pulled away, getting smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the trees. She was alone now. Alone in a house that felt wrong in ways she couldn't articulate, with a man who owned her as surely as he owned his slaves, with children who seemed more like ghosts than living people, and with something underneath the floorboards that Ruth insisted was calling names. Dinner was served in the dining room at exactly 6 o'clock. Sarah was summoned by one of Patterson's sons, Jesse, the 12-year-old who had the same ice-blue eyes as his father, and the same unsettling habit of staring without blinking. The dining room had a long table that could seat 12 people, but only 5 were present. Silas Patterson at the head, his 3 sons on one side, Sarah and Ruth on the other. The meal was better than anything Sarah had eaten in months. Roasted chicken and potatoes and fresh bread, but it might as well have been sawdust for all she could taste it. Patterson talked during the meal about his tobacco crop, about a land dispute with his neighbor, about politics in Frankfurt that Sarah didn't understand. He didn't address Sarah directly, didn't acknowledge her presence except to occasionally glance in her direction, with an expression that made her skin crawl. His sons ate in silence, cutting their food with precise movements, never speaking unless spoken to. Ruth pushed food around her plate without eating much of anything. "Sarah," Patterson said suddenly, and Sarah jumped at the sound of her name. "I expect you to learn the running of this household. Bessie will teach you cooking and cleaning. You'll help with the mending and the washing. You'll care for Ruth and make sure she keeps herself proper. In 2 weeks we'll be married, and then you'll assume the full duties of a wife." He paused, taking a sip of wine from a crystal glass. "I'm a fair man. I don't expect perfection, but I do expect obedience. My first wife understood this eventually. I trust you will as well." "Yes, sir," Sarah managed to say, though her throat felt tight. "Good." Patterson smiled, that smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Now there are some rules you need to understand. First, you do not enter the cellar, under any circumstances. The cellar is locked, and only I have the key. Second, you do not wander the property at night. Third, you do not speak to the slaves beyond what's necessary for your duty. Fourth, you do not ask questions about my business or my affairs. And fifth, most importantly, you do not disturb me when I'm in my study. Do you understand these rules?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said again. "Excellent. Jessie, take your sister and get ready for bed. Sarah, you may retire to your room. We keep early hours in this house." Sarah escaped to the attic as quickly as she could without running. She lay on the narrow bed in her clothes, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. Footsteps on the stairs, doors closing, murmured voices, and then, as the house grew quiet and dark, she heard it, a sound from below, from far below, deeper than the first floor, deeper than any basement should be. It was a scratching sound, rhythmic, persistent, like fingernails on wood, and underneath it, so faint she might have imagined it, something that could have been humming, a tune she almost recognized, a lullaby her mother used to sing. Sarah pressed her hands over her ears, but she could still hear it. She pulled the thin blanket over her head, but she could still hear it. And as she lay there in the darkness, she understood with terrible certainty that Ruth had been telling the truth. There was something under the house, something that made sounds, something that knew lullaby, something that was waiting. Sarah didn't sleep that first night. Every time she closed her eyes, the scratching sound seemed to get louder, more insistent, like whatever was making it knew she was listening and wanted her attention. When dawn finally came, grey light filtering through the round attic window, she felt hollow and strange, like she'd left part of herself somewhere in the darkness and couldn't quite get it back. She could hear the household stirring below, footsteps and voices, the clang of pots in the kitchen building, a rooster screaming its morning declaration. Normal sounds, sounds that should have been comforting, but instead felt like a thin veneer stretched over something rotten. Bessie found her sitting on the edge of the bed, still in yesterday's dress, her hair tangled and her eyes red-rimmed. The older woman stood in the doorway, with her arms crossed, studying Sarah with an expression that might have been sympathy or might have been resignation. "You heard them, didn't you?" Bessie said quietly. It wasn't really a question. "The sounds from below," Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Bessie sighed deeply, a sound that seemed to come from the very bottom of her lungs. "Come on down to the kitchen. Get some food in you. Then we'll talk about what you need to know to survive in this house. Because, child, survival is the only thing that matters here. Understanding is a luxury you can't afford." In the kitchen building, Bessie fed her corn mush with molasses and a cup of milk still warm from the cow. Sarah ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind still caught on that scratching sound, that almost lullaby. Through the window she could see enslaved people heading to the fields, their movements slow in the early morning chill. She could see Patterson's oldest son, Marcus, who was 15, walking toward the barn with a rifle over his shoulder. She could see Ruth standing alone in the yard, perfectly still, staring at nothing, "That child ain't right," Bessie said, following Sarah's gaze. "Hasn't been right since her mama died. Used to be she'd play, make noise like children do. Now she just stands there, staring at things nobody else can see. Master Patterson says she's grieving. But it's more than that. It's like something broke inside her. The day they buried her mama, and whatever broke can't be fixed." "What was she like?" Sarah asked. "His first wife, I mean." "Mary." Bessie's face tightened. "Mary Patterson was a good woman when she came here. Sweet, hopeful, thought she was marrying up, thought she'd have a fine life in this big house with a respected man." She paused, scraping out the bottom of the mush pot with more force than necessary. "She lasted 8 years, 8 years of bearing his children, 8 years of following his rules, 8 years of pretending she didn't hear the sounds, didn't see the things that happened here. Toward the end she wasn't sweet no more, wasn't hopeful. She was hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside her and left just the shell walking around." "What things?" Sarah whispered. "What things did she see?" Bessie set down the pot with a bang that made Sarah jump. "Things you're better off not knowing about. Things that'll get you hurt if you ask too many questions. Now listen to me, and listen good. You want to survive until you can figure out how to get away from here. You follow these rules exactly. 1. You do your work and you do it well. Master Patterson values usefulness. 2. You never, ever try to go into that cellar, and you never ask what's down there. 3. If you hear sounds at night, you pretend you don't. You stuff your ears with cloth if you have to, but you never acknowledge them sounds to anyone, especially not to Master Patterson. 4. You stay away from the Master's study. That door stays closed, and what happens behind it ain't your concern. And 5. You be very, very careful around Marcus." "Marcus? The oldest son?" Bessie's eyes went dark. "That boy learned everything he knows from his daddy, and what he learned ain't good. He's got his father's appetites and his father's cruelty, but he ain't learned his father's control yet. You stay out of his way. You don't never find yourself alone with him. You understand?" Sarah nodded, a new fear adding itself to all the others piling up inside her chest. She thought about Marcus's ice blue eyes, so like his father's, and the way he'd looked at her last night across the dinner table, like she was something he was evaluating, pricing, considering for purchase. The days before the wedding blurred together into a nightmare of domesticity and dread. Sarah learned to churn butter and render lard and scrub floors until her hands were raw. She learned which rooms Patterson entered frequently and which he avoided. She learned the names of the enslaved people who worked the property. Bessie in the kitchen, Moses who managed the tobacco fields, Celia who did the washing, Jacob who tended the horses, and others whose names she collected like stones in her pockets, weighing her down with the knowledge of how many people were trapped here just as she was. She learned that Patterson spent hours in his study, that locked room on the first floor where lamplight showed under the door late into the night. She learned that his sons moved through the house like well-trained dogs, obedient and watchful, and somehow dangerous in their obedience. She learned that Ruth barely spoke, barely ate, barely seemed to exist, except as a small, pale ghost drifting through rooms. And she learned about the sounds. Every night, as the house settled into darkness, they would start, scratching, thumping, sometimes voices so muted by distance and wood and earth that Sarah couldn't make out words, only the rhythm of speech, the cadence of pleading or praying, or both. She did what Bessie advised and stuffed cloth in her ears. But even through the cloth she could feel the sounds more than hear them, vibrations traveling up through the floorboards and into her bones. On the 5th night, unable to bear it anymore, Sarah crept out of her attic room and down the stairs, moving as quietly as she could. She needed to know, needed to understand what was making those sounds, what was living or existing or suffering in the space beneath the house. The first floor was dark, except for a sliver of light under Patterson's study door. She could hear him in there, moving around, the clink of glass against glass, the scratch of a pen on paper. Sarah moved past the study door, barely breathing, and found her way to the kitchen. She'd seen a door there, a heavy wooden door with an iron lock that Bessie had told her led to the cellar. In the darkness, guided only by moonlight through the windows, Sarah approached that door. She pressed her ear against the wood, straining to hear. The scratching was louder here, much louder, and the voices were clearer too. She could make out words now, or thought she could. Please and help, and cold and dark, and underneath it all, a sound that might have been sobbing, or might have been laughter. She couldn't tell which. Sarah's hand moved toward the iron lock, trembling, reaching to test if it was really secured, and that's when a hand clamped down on her shoulder, spinning her around. It was Marcus. He stood in the darkness, tall and lean like his father, his face in shadow, but his ice-blue eyes catching the moonlight like a cat's. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, and his voice was quiet, conversational, which somehow made it more frightening than if he'd shouted. "I heard sounds," Sarah stammered. "I thought maybe an animal was trapped down there. I thought maybe I should—" "You thought wrong," Marcus interrupted. He was standing too close to her, close enough that she could smell whiskey on his breath. "My father has ruled. You've been here less than a week, and you're already breaking them. That's disappointing, Sarah. That's very disappointing indeed." His hand on her shoulder tightened. "I should tell my father about this. I should wake him right now and let him know his new bride can't follow simple instructions. You know what he does to people who break his rules." "Please," Sarah whispered. "Please don't. I'm sorry. I won't do it again." Marcus leaned closer, and Sarah could see his face now, see the smile that played across his lips, cruel and knowing. "Maybe I won't tell him. Maybe this can be our secret. But secrets have a price, Sarah. Everything has a price in this house. You'll learn that soon enough." His other hand came up to touch her face, his fingers cold against her cheek. "You're a pretty little thing, too young for my taste right now, but give it a year or two, and maybe we can come to an arrangement. After all, my father's getting old. He won't live forever, and when he's gone, everything here will be mine, including you." Sarah tried to pull away, but Marcus held her firm. "Don't fight," he said softly. "Fighting just makes things worse. My mother fought. It didn't help her." Then he released her suddenly, stepping back. "Go to bed, Sarah. Forget about the cellar. Forget about the sounds. And remember that I was kind to you tonight. Remember that I could have told my father, but I didn't. You owe me for that." Sarah fled up the stairs, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her chest. In her attic room, she shoved the trunk against the door, knowing it wouldn't really keep anyone out but needing the illusion of safety. She lay in bed shaking, and the sounds from below seemed to mock her fear, scratching and thumping and whispering in voices that knew all about terror, knew all about helplessness, knew all about being trapped in a place where no one would hear you scream. The next morning, Bessie took one look at Sarah's face and knew something had happened. "Marcus?" she asked, quietly, while they were alone in the kitchen, kneading bread dough side by side. Sarah nodded. Bessie's mouth pressed into a thin line. "I warned you about him. Did he hurt you?" "No, not really. He touched my face. Said things." Sarah's hands trembled as she worked the dough. "Bessie, what's in that cellar? What's making those sounds? Don't ask me that. I have to know. I can't live here without knowing. I can't marry him in a week without understanding what I'm marrying into." Bessie stopped kneading and looked at Sarah with eyes that held decades of accumulated pain. "You really want to know? You really think knowing will help you?" She glanced toward the door, making sure they were truly alone. "Fine. I'll tell you what I know, but you can't never repeat it, and you can't never act like you know it. You understand?" "I understand." Bessie's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Master Patterson, he ain't just a tobacco farmer. He's got other business he don't talk about in polite society. Business involving girls, young girls, girls from poor families, girls nobody would miss, girls whose parents are desperate enough to sell them for a price." She paused, her face twisted with disgust and sorrow. Some of those girls, they get sold to men in other counties, other states. Some of them disappear entirely, and some of them the ones who cause problems, the ones who try to run or fight back or make too much noise. Some of them end up in that cellar. Sarah's stomach turned to ice. Are they alive down there? I don't know. I pray they ain't. I pray that what I hear at night is just rats, or wind, or the house settling. But in my heart I know better. Bessie's eyes filled with tears that she blinked away angrily. His first wife, Mary. She found out about it. About 3 months before she died, she found papers in his study, documents with names and prices. She confronted him. After that, she changed, got quiet, got scared, started locking herself in that attic room where you sleep now, like she was trying to hide from what she knew. How did she really die? Sarah asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Labor complications is what the doctor said. But I helped birth that baby, and I've helped birth dozens of babies in my life. What I saw in that birthing room wasn't natural. The way she bled, the way she screamed, the things she said about it being punishment, about deserving to die. Bessie shook her head. I think she gave up. I think she knew she couldn't live with what she knew, couldn't live in this house with that monster, couldn't protect herself or her children, so she just let go, let herself bleed out, let herself leave. Sarah felt like the floor was tilting under her feet. I have to get out of here. I have to run. And go where? Bessie asked sharply. You got no money, no family that'll take you back after they accepted Patterson's payment. Nowhere to run to. You think you can just walk out of Cumberland County. You think Patterson won't send men after you. You think your own father won't drag you back here to protect his agreement. She gripped Sarah's shoulders hard enough to hurt. Listen to me, girl. The only way out of this house is in a coffin, or with a plan so smart and so careful that you don't mess it up. You try to run now, you'll end up in that cellar. You'll end up as one of those sounds in the night. Is that what you want? No, Sarah whispered. No, I don't want that. Then you be patient. You survive. You watch and you learn and you wait for your chance. It might take months. It might take years. But if you're smart and careful, you might find a way out. Mary wasn't smart enough or careful enough. Don't make her mistakes. The wedding was held on a Thursday morning, exactly 2 weeks after Sarah arrived at the Patterson estate. Reverend Hayes came from town, a fat man with kind eyes who seemed genuinely to believe he was performing a blessed union. Patterson's neighbors attended, 5 families who brought gifts of preserves and quilts, and whispered congratulations that felt like condolences. Sarah wore Mary Patterson's wedding dress, a cream-colored gown with lace at the collar and cuffs, altered hastily to fit her smaller frame. It smelled like lavender and mothballs, and something else, something that might have been fear, sweat, or tears, or both. Sarah stood beside Silas Patterson in the front parlor, surrounded by people who smiled and nodded and acted like this was normal, like an 11-year-old girl marrying a 43-year-old man was cause for celebration rather than horror. She repeated the words the reverend told her to say. She felt Patterson slip a ring onto her finger, a gold band that had belonged to Mary, still warm from his pocket. She felt him kiss her cheek, his beard rough against her skin, his breath hot and damp. You're mine now, he whispered in her ear, so quietly that only she could hear. Legally, spiritually, completely mine. Don't ever forget that. The wedding breakfast was elaborate. Ham and biscuits and eggs and pie, more food than Sarah had seen in one place in her entire life. She sat at the head of the table beside her new husband, accepting congratulations from people whose names she couldn't remember, smiling until her face hurt, dying inside with every passing moment. Ruth sat across from her, staring with those 2 large eyes, and Sarah could see knowledge in that child's face, knowledge of exactly what was coming, exactly what Sarah's life would be from this moment forward. After the guests left and the house grew quiet, Patterson took Sarah's hand and led her upstairs, not to her attic room, but to his bedroom, the master bedroom that took up half of the 2nd floor. It had a large 4-poster bed with heavy curtains, a wardrobe carved from dark wood, a fireplace with a mirror above it, and windows that looked out over the fields where enslaved people were still working, even though it was a wedding day, because their labor never stopped, never paused for celebrations or sorrows. "I'm a patient man," Patterson said, closing the door behind them. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot to Sarah's ears. "I told your father I would wait until you were older for marital relations, and I'll keep that promise. But there are other ways a wife serves her husband. Other ways you can learn to be useful to me." He sat on the edge of the bed and gestured for her to come closer. "Come here, Sarah. It's time for your education to begin." Sarah's legs moved on their own, carrying her across the room even as her mind screamed at her to run, to fight, to do something, anything. But Bessie's words echoed in her head. Survive, be patient, wait for your chance. So she came closer, and Patterson pulled her down to sit beside him, and his hand touched her hair, her face, her wreck, and Sarah went somewhere else in her mind, somewhere far away where none of this was happening, where she was still 11 years old, and free and unowned. That night, lying in the large bed beside her husband, while he slept, Sarah stared at the ceiling and planned. She planned how she would survive. She planned how she would learn the secrets of this house. She planned how she would eventually escape, no matter how long it took, no matter what she had to endure to get there. And she listened to the sounds from below, the scratching and thumping and voices, and she made them a promise in her mind. "I will find out who you are. I will find out what happened to you. And somehow, someway, I will make sure the world knows what Silas Patterson has done." 3 days after the wedding, Sarah found the first clue. She was cleaning Patterson's study while he was out inspecting the tobacco fields, a task Bessie had assigned her with strict instructions to touch nothing, rid nothing, just dust and sweep and leave. But Sarah couldn't help noticing the papers on his desk, documents covered in neat handwriting. She glanced at the door, listened for footsteps, and quickly scanned the top page. It was a letter addressed to someone named Cornelius Wade in Louisville. It read, "The merchandise you requested is ready for transport." 3 items, ages 9, 12, and 14, all in good condition and appropriately prepared for their new positions. "Payment as agreed upon delivery. I trust you will find the quality satisfactory. Destroy this correspondence after read." Sarah's hands shook as she set the letter down exactly where it had been. Merchandise, items, ages 9, 12, and 14. Girls. He was selling girls to someone in Louisville, and he was writing about them like they were livestock, like they were things instead of human beings, and appropriately prepared. What did that mean? What horrors did that phrase hide? She finished cleaning quickly and left the study, her heart pounding. That night, the sounds from the cellar seemed louder than ever, more urgent, more desperate. Sarah lay in the dark beside her sleeping husband and wondered how many girls had passed through this house. How many had been sold? How many had disappeared? How many were still here, still alive, still hoping someone would save them? And she wondered if she would become one of them, if someday she would be the one making sounds in the darkness, the one scratching at wood, the one calling for help that would never come. Winter came early to Cumberland County that year of 1840, bringing with it snow that piled against the windows and winds that howled through the gaps in the walls like wounded animals. Sarah had been married to Silas Patterson for 6 weeks, and in that time she had learned things she wished she could unlearn, seen things she wished she could unsee, and understood with terrible clarity that the house she now lived in was built on a foundation of suffering so deep and so wide that it would take more than her lifetime to excavate all its horrors. The scratching sounds from the cellar had become almost constant now, a background noise she'd learned to tune out the way you might tune out the ticking of a clock. Except sometimes at night when the wind died down and the house went still, she could hear words mixed in with the scratching, words that sounded like names being called over and over. Emma, and Catherine and Lily and others she couldn't quite make out. Patterson had grown more comfortable with her presence, which meant he'd grown less careful about hiding his business. She'd seen him meet with men in his study, rough-looking men who arrived after dark and left before dawn, men who spoke in low voices about acquisitions and transport routes and market demand. She'd seen him count money on his desk, stacks of bills that he recorded in a leather-bound ledger he kept locked in a drawer. She'd seen the way he looked at Ruth sometimes, his own daughter, with an expression that made Sarah's stomach turn, an expression that suggested he was calculating, measuring, deciding when she might become profitable rather than merely expensive to keep. It was Marcus who finally confirmed what Sarah had been piecing together. He cornered her in the hallway outside her old attic room one afternoon when Patterson was in town, and the other sons were working in the barn. He stood too close as always, invading her space in a way that made her skin crawl, and he smiled that cruel smile that was becoming as familiar to her as her own reflection. "You've figured it out, haven't you?" he said, conversationally, like they were discussing the weather. "I can see it in your face. You know what my father does. You know what business keeps this house running, keeps food on our table, keeps us in fine clothes and good standing with the county families." He tilted his head, studying her like she was a specimen under glass. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "Nothing," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady, even though her pulse was racing. "I'm going to do nothing because I'm smart enough to know that doing something would only get me hurt." "Smart girl," Marcus said approvingly. "Much smarter than my mother was. She thought she could shame him into stopping. Thought she could threaten to go to the authorities. Didn't realize that the authorities already know that half the respectable men in this county are customers or partners, or both. Didn't realize that she was just as trapped as any of those girls in the cellar. Maybe more trapped because she had the illusion of freedom." He reached out and tucked a strand of Sarah's hair behind her ear, a gesture that might have seemed tender if not for the coldness in his eyes. "You want to survive here? You do what my mother should have done. You close your eyes. You close your ears. You close your mind to everything except the daily tasks of being a good wife. And maybe, if you're very good, my father will keep you safe. Maybe he won't decide you're more valuable sold than kept." Sarah felt ice water flood her veins. He would sell his own wife? "He's sold everything else that's ever belonged to him," Marcus said with a shrug. "Why should you be different? You think that ring on your finger means something. You think those vows the reverend spoke make you untouchable. Your property, Sarah. Same as the slaves in the quarters, same as the girls in the cellar, same as the land and the livestock and everything else he owns. The only difference is how much you're worth and whether he thinks he can get a better price for you now or later." He walked away then, leaving Sarah standing in the hallway, with her hands trembling and her mind racing. She thought about running, thought about it every single day, but Bessie was right. Where would she go? Her parents had taken Patterson's money and spent it, used it to survive the winter, used it to pay debts. They wouldn't take her back. They couldn't afford to. If she ran without a destination, without money or resources, Patterson would find her within days, and whatever happened after that would be worse than anything she was enduring now. That night at dinner, Sarah watched Patterson carefully, seeing him with new eyes. He ate his roasted chicken with precise movements, cutting each bite into exact portions, chewing thoughtfully while he talked about the weather and the tobacco market and a new colt in the barn. He was a monster, but he was a monster who said grace before meals and donated money to the church and served as a witness in court cases. He was a monster who looked respectable, who acted civilized, who hid his true nature behind a mask of Southern gentleman propriety. And that made him more dangerous than any obvious villain, because people believed his mask, trusted his mask, protected his mask, even when evidence of what lay beneath it was literally screaming from his basement. After dinner, while Bessie was cleaning the kitchen and the boys had gone to their rooms, Sarah found Ruth standing in the back hallway, staring at the locked cellar door. The child stood perfectly still, so still she barely seemed to be breathing, and Sarah noticed for the first time that Ruth had lost weight, that her dress hung even more loosely than before, that her skin had taken on a translucent quality like you could almost see through her, to the bones beneath. Ruth, Sarah said softly, not wanting to startle her. What are you doing? Listening, Ruth said without turning around. I'm listening to them call. They call every night now. They know I can hear them. They know I'm up here, and they're down there, and there's just a door between us. Just one locked door, and if someone would only open it, if someone would only help them, they could get out. They could go home. They could see their families again. She finally turned to look at Sarah, and her eyes were fever bright, burning with an intensity that seemed too large for such a small face. Do you hear them calling? Yes, Sarah admitted, because lying seemed pointless. I hear them. Mama heard them too. She tried to help them. She stole Papa's key one night and opened the door and went down into the cellar, and when she came back up, she was different. She wouldn't talk about what she saw down there. She wouldn't tell anyone. But after that night, she started getting sick, started losing the baby, started dying. Ruth's voice was flat, emotionless, reciting facts. Papa said it was God's punishment for her disobedience. Said she'd broken the most important rule and paid the price for it. But I don't think it was God who punished her. I think it was Papa. I think he put something in her food or did something to her, or hurt her in a way that looked like sickness but wasn't. I think he killed her for trying to help them. Sarah felt the hallway tilting around her, walls pressing in. Ruth, you can't say things like that. If your father heard you, he already knows what I think. Ruth interrupted. He knows I know what he is. That's why he's going to sell me. Marcus told me, said Papa's been negotiating with a man in Nashville, a man who wants a girl my age for his household. Said it'll happen in the spring, after the roads dry out enough for travel. Said I should feel lucky because at least I'll still be alive, which is more than most of the girls who come through here can say. Sarah knelt down so she was eye level with the child. Ruth, listen to me. I won't let that happen. I promise you I will find a way to stop it. Ruth laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You can't stop it. Nobody can stop it. This is what our family does. This is what we've always done. Papa did it, and his father did it before him, and someday Marcus will do it when he's the man of the house. It's our legacy, our inheritance. The Patterson fortune is built on selling girls, Sarah, built on their bones and their tears and their screams, and you're part of it now. You're one of the monsters. I'm not a monster, Sarah said fiercely, and neither are you. We're victims, Ruth. We're trapped here just like those girls in the cellar, and we need to help each other survive until we can find a way out. There is no way out, Ruth said simply. There's only down, down into the cellar, down into the dark, down where everyone ends up eventually. She walked away then, drifting up the stairs like smoke, leaving Sarah kneeling alone in the hallway with the sound of scratching and crying seeping through the cracks in the cellar door. 2 days later, Sarah was hanging laundry in the yard when she saw something that changed everything. One of the enslaved men, Jacob, was loading supplies into a wagon, and among the sacks of grain and barrels of salted pork, Sarah glimpsed what looked like a small bundle wrapped in canvas, roughly the size and shape of a child. Jacob saw her watching, and his face went carefully blank, expressionless, but his eyes met hers for just a moment, and in that moment, Sarah saw a plea, a warning, a shared understanding of horror. She approached him carefully, glancing around to make sure they weren't being observed. Jacob, she said quietly, what's in that bundle? Nothing that concerns you, ma'am, he said, his voice neutral. Just supplies for the master's business. Jacob, please. I need to know. I need to understand what's happening here. He looked at her for a long moment, weighing something in his mind. Then he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. You don't want to know, Mrs. Sarah. Knowing will just make it worse. Make it harder to sleep. Make it harder to look at yourself in the mirror. I already can't sleep. I already can't look at myself. Please, tell me what's in that bundle. Jacob's jaw tightened. It's a girl. Was a girl. Name was Lily, maybe 8 years old. Came here 3 months ago from a family up in the mountains, family so poor they sold her for $20 and a bag of seed corn. She was supposed to be transported to a buyer in Lexington, but she got sick, fever, cough, that wouldn't stop. Master Patterson doesn't ship damaged goods, so Jacob couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. What will you do with her? Bury her out in the backwoods where nobody goes. There's others buried out there too. Many others. Been working for Master Patterson for 12 years, and I've buried more children than I can count. Little girls who got sick, who tried to run, who fought back, who knew too much, who were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I dig the holes and I say a prayer, and I cover them up, and I try to forget their faces, but I can't. I remember every single one. Why don't you tell someone? Sarah asked desperately. Why don't you go to the authorities? Jacob looked at her like she'd said something unutterably naive. Tell who? The sheriff who buys girls from Master Patterson for his own use. The judge who gets a cut of the profits. The reverend who looks the other way because Master Patterson donates to the church. Every person of power in this county knows what happens here, Mrs. Sarah. They know and they don't care, or they know and they participate, or they know and they're too scared to do anything about it. And even if I found someone who cared, even if I found someone brave enough to try to stop it, what do you think would happen to me? I'm a slave. My word means nothing. I'd be whipped or sold or killed for speaking out, and Master Patterson would continue doing exactly what he's been doing, because men like him always do. Sarah watched Jacob finish loading the wagon and drive away toward the woods, carrying his small, terrible burden. She stood in the yard with wet laundry forgotten in the basket at her feet, and understood with crushing finality that she was living in a house of death, that every floorboard she walked on was soaked with the suffering of children, that every meal she ate was paid for with blood money, and that every night she spent in Patterson's bed made her complicit in horrors she could barely comprehend. That evening, driven by a need she couldn't name, Sarah did something she'd been forbidden to do. She waited until Patterson was absorbed in his ledgers in the study, until the boys were asleep in their rooms, until Bessie had gone back to her cabin in the slave quarters. And then she crept down to the kitchen building. She'd been watching Patterson for weeks, studying his routines, and she'd noticed that he kept a spare key to the cellar hanging on a nail inside the flour barrel, hidden but accessible in case he needed it quickly. Her hands shook as she reached into the barrel, flour dusting her fingers, and found the key cold iron against her palm. The cellar door opened with a creak that sounded deafening in the quiet kitchen. Sarah held her lamp high and looked down into darkness that seemed to have no bottom. Stairs descended into blackness, wooden steps worn smooth by countless footsteps. The smell that came up from below was indescribable, a mixture of human waste and fear sweat and something else, something sweet and rotten that made Sarah gag. She took the first step down, then another. The stairs creaked under her weight, and from below she heard movement. Rustling, whispers. Who's there? A voice called out, thin and frightened. Is someone coming? I'm coming, Sarah called back, her voice shaking. I'm coming to help you. She reached the bottom of the stairs and held her lamp high, and what she saw made her drop to her knees, lamp nearly falling from her hand. The cellar was larger than she'd expected, extending under the entire house. Dirt floor and stone walls and wooden beams holding up the ceiling, and chained to those beams, connected by iron shackles, were girls. 7 girls, ranging in age from maybe 6 to 14, filthy and thin, and wide-eyed with terror and hope. They wore rags that might have once been dresses. They had sores on their wrists from the shackles. They looked at Sarah like she might be salvation or she might be another tormentor. They couldn't tell which yet. Please, one of them whispered, a girl of about 10 with tangled red hair. Please help us. We've been here so long. Some of us have been here for months. We're so hungry. We're so cold. Please, please help us. Sarah set down her lamp and moved toward them, her mind racing. 7 girls, 7 children. She couldn't free them all, couldn't lead them out without being caught. Patterson would hear, the boys would wake. She'd be stopped before she got even one girl to safety. But she couldn't leave them here either. Couldn't close the door and lock it again and pretend she hadn't seen their faces, hadn't heard their pleas. "What's your name?" Sarah asked the red-haired girl, kneeling beside her. "Emma," the girl said. "Emma Hartley. I'm from Cumberland County. My mama sold me for $15 because we didn't have food for winter. The man who bought me said I'd work in a house in Louisville, said I'd be treated well, but then he brought me here and Master Patterson put me in these chains and said I had to wait for my real buyer, and I've been waiting for 3 months, and I'm so scared I'm going to die down here." "You're not going to die," Sarah said, though she had no idea if that was true. "I'm going to get you out. I'm going to get all of you out. But I need time. I need to make a plan. Can you be patient? Can you be strong just a little longer?" Another girl spoke up, older, maybe 13, with dark hair and eyes that looked ancient, despite her young face. "Don't make promises you can't keep. We've had promises before. Other people have come down here, people who worked in the house, people who said they'd help. They never came back. Either they were too scared, or Master Patterson found out and stopped them. Don't give us hope if you're just going to take it away again." "I mean it," Sarah said fiercely. "I swear to you I will find a way to free you. My name is Sarah. Sarah Patterson now, though that's not the name I was born with. I'm his wife, which means I have access to things other people don't, which means I can move through this house without raising suspicion, which means I might be able to help you in ways no one else could." His wife? Emma's eyes went wide. "But you're just a girl yourself. You're not much older than Catherine." She gestured to one of the other prisoners, a girl who looked about 12. "I'm 11, Sarah said. "Almost 12. I was sold too, just like you. Sold by my parents to this monster, married to him, trapped here. The only difference between us is that my cage is prettier than yours, but we're all prisoners in this house. All of us. And we need to help each other if any of us are going to survive." She spent another 10 minutes talking to them, learning their names and their stories. Emma from Cumberland County, Catherine from Bell County, Lily who died just days ago, another Lily still alive, a girl named Rose, one named Margaret, one named Anne. Girls from poor families, desperate families, families who'd been promised their daughters would have better lives, families who'd believed the lies or hadn't cared enough to question them. Girls who'd been down in this cellar for weeks or months, waiting to be sold to buyers across Kentucky and beyond, living in darkness and fear and filth, with no hope except the hope that someone somewhere would eventually save them. Sarah climbed back up the stairs, locked the cellar door, replaced the key in the flour barrel, and returned to the main house feeling like she'd aged a decade in the span of an hour. She crawled into bed beside her sleeping husband, this man who trafficked in children, this monster who wore a gentleman's face, and she lay there in the darkness making plans. She would free those girls. She would expose Patterson. She would make sure the world knew what happened in this house. She didn't know how yet. She didn't know when. But she would do it. She had to do it. Because if she didn't, if she let herself become complicit through inaction, then she really would be a monster. Just like Ruth had said. 3 days after Sarah's visit to the cellar, Silas Patterson announced at breakfast that he would be traveling to Louisville on business, would be gone for 4 days, and that Marcus would be in charge of the household during his absence. He looked at Sarah when he said this, his ice blue eyes holding a warning. "I expect you to behave yourself while I'm gone. Stay in the house. Do your duties. Don't cause Marcus any trouble. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Sarah said, keeping her eyes down, playing the role of obedient wife. Patterson left the next morning in his finest traveling clothes, riding a horse worth more than most families earned in a year, and Sarah watched from the window until he disappeared down the road. Then she turned to find Marcus standing behind her, that cruel smile on his face. 4 days, he said softly. 4 days when Father's not here to protect you. 4 days when I'm the master of this house. 4 days when you're mine to do with as I please. He stepped closer. I've been patient, Sarah, very patient. But my patience has limits. Tonight, after everyone's asleep, I'm coming to your room, and you're going to show me the same gratitude you show my father. You're going to be very, very nice to me, because if you're not, if you fight me or refuse me or make any trouble at all, I'll tell Father when he gets back that you tried to seduce me, that you're unfaithful, that you're disobedient. And do you know what Father does to unfaithful wives? Do you know what happened to a woman 3 counties over who was caught with another man? Sarah's voice came out steady despite the terror coursing through her. What happened to her? He sold her, Marcus said simply. Sold her to a brothel in New Orleans. She was 35 years old, had 3 children, had been married to the man for 15 years. Didn't matter. He sold her like livestock, and the authorities look the other way because a man has the right to dispose of his property, however he sees fit. So you think about that tonight, Sarah. You think about whether refusing me is worth ending up in a brothel in New Orleans, servicing 20 men a day until you die of disease or exhaustion or despair. He walked away and Sarah stood frozen by the window, her mind whirling. She had until tonight to come up with a plan, to figure out how to protect herself, to decide what to do. And in that moment, standing in the house of horrors, surrounded by the evidence of decades of evil, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She would not be a victim anymore. She would not wait patiently for rescue. She would not endure quietly until she could escape. She would fight. She would act. And if that meant becoming something other than the frightened girl she'd been when she arrived here, then so be it. She spent the afternoon preparing, moving through the house with purpose, gathering what she needed. A knife from the kitchen, small enough to hide, but sharp enough to cut. Matches from the fireplace. The spare key to the cellar. A length of rope she found in the barn. She hid these items in her room, tucked under the mattress, behind the wardrobe, in places Marcus wouldn't think to look. And then she waited. Night came slowly, the sun setting behind the hills in a blaze of red and gold that reminded Sarah of blood and fires. Dinner was tense, Marcus watching her, across the table with that knowing smile, Jessie and Thomas oblivious to the undercurrents. Ruth didn't eat, just pushed food around her plate and stared at nothing. After dinner, Sarah helped Bessie clean up, and the older woman looked at her with concern. "Something's wrong," Bessie said quietly. "I can see it in your face." "What's happened?" "Marcus," Sarah said simply, and she saw understanding dawn in Bessie's eyes. "Lord have mercy," Bessie whispered. "Child, you can't fight him. He's too strong, too mean. You fight him, he'll hurt you bad." "I know," Sarah said. "That's why I'm not going to fight him." She looked Bessie in the eyes. "I'm going to kill him." Bessie's hands stilled on the pot she was scrubbing. "You can't mean that." "I mean it completely. He's coming to my room tonight. He told me he was, and I can let him rape me, or I can stop him. Those are my only choices. So I'm choosing to stop him." Sarah's voice was calm, eerily calm. "And after I stop him, I'm going to free the girls in the cellar. I'm going to burn this house down. I'm going to make sure Silas Patterson's evil dies here, tonight, before he can hurt anyone else." "They'll hang you," Bessie said desperately. "They'll hang you for murder and arson." "Maybe," Sarah said. "Or maybe they'll believe that Marcus attacked me and I defended myself. Maybe they'll believe that the fire was an accident. Maybe I'll escape before they can catch me. I don't know what will happen, but I know I can't live like this anymore. I can't be complicit in this evil. I can't share a bed with a monster and pretend I'm anything other than a monster myself. So I'm ending it. Tonight." She went to her room and waited in the darkness, the knife hidden under her pillow, her heart beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Hours passed. The house grew quiet. And then, just after midnight, she heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy and deliberate, coming closer. The door opened, Marcus stood silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway, and Sarah could smell whiskey on him, smell sweat and something darker. He closed the door behind him and smiled. "Ready for your lesson?" he asked. Sarah's hand closed around the knife handle. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'm ready."